One is a noxious weed, and that's a federal or state designation, and it typically has to do with economics. Does it hurt the economy of the system? So in our state, primarily, that's agriculture. So there are a lot of invasive plants that aren't on the noxious weed list because they don't affect agriculture, because they don't grow in ag fields. This is one that can grow in ag fields, so it is listed in a lot of the state invasive plants. However, it's not considered a noxious weed because it's easy to knock down in an ag field. So some of the native plants we have, this right here, this is wood nettle. Not touching it because it has tiny hairs on it that can cause a reaction. It can cause a rash and itching, some swelling. Occasionally it causes hives, but it goes away after about 30, 45 minutes. Still not fun. Underneath it is a ground ivy plant. This is also an escaped garden plant. You don't often find it in natural areas unless it is right up against a neighborhood. So it can cause damage if there are other issues in the system. So it's not technically invasive. And then this one here, Pendant or Creeping Charlie. This one is invasive. This one can take over large areas of land. It is a tenacious ground cover that gets very happy in both shade and sun. So one of the hallmarks of invasives is that they outcompete the natives. For example, honeysuckle produces leaves early and keeps them on late. They also produce a whole lot of seeds, and they tend to seed out earlier than our native shrubs. So this gives them an edge. They also have very bright berries that attract the birds. Unfortunately, they don't provide nutrition to our native birds. So it's like the birds will fill up on these berries, not get any nutrition from it, and it can harm their migration. They look cool. They make a great shrub cover, not something that anybody wants you to plant in their yard. So one of the questions we get is, okay, it's invasive. We know it needs to go, but I still need plants there. What do I do? For pretty much any use of an invasive, there is a native alternative. One good place you can go to find a list of alternatives is the Nebraska Statewide Arboretum. They do have lists of native plants for the area. They're not necessarily native to Bellevue or the Loess Hills or the Missouri River Corridor, but they're at least native to the Nebraska region area. Let's see. Oh, there's a couple other invasives here that we can show you that you'll likely find in your yard or as you're walking through the forest or the park. So this one here is called garlic mustard. So this is actually a second-year plant. It is in the mustard family, and it was brought over from Europe as a salad plant. So this was actually planted in people's gardens as a food plant. So I'm going to pull it. You guys joining us online won't be able to experience this, but for those of you guys here, if you crush the leaves and you smell it, it's got a very pungent, garlicky, mustardy smell. I'm sure you guys have smelled garlic mustard before. Garlic mustard plants, each plant produces thousands and thousands of seeds. So that's one way they outcompete. They also can become a ground cover plant. So this is a second-year plant. First-year plants create rosettes. So they actually look a lot like Creeping Charlie, which is what this one is. I actually don't see any rosettes. Oh yeah, here we go. Oh, that one's Creeping Charlie too. Yeah, so there aren't any rosette plants here. So it's actually being outcompeted by another invasive. The good news is, however, that there are plenty of native plants in this area too. So right here we have some violets, and we have Virginia waterleaf. So this is a great forest woodland ground cover plant. It creates these cool little flower bundles that have purplish white flowers. We also have bed straw, super annoying if you're a gardener, but very much native. So one of the adaptations this plant has that's really cool is we call it a Velcro plant. there are little tiny hairs on it that are hooked, just like Velcro. And the way it disperses its seeds is it attaches to animals, and then it'll fall off and drop its seeds there. Now I can't get it off. There we go. So we also have some native grasses here. So it's a type of woodland grass. I don't know which kind it is. I would need to look that up. But this is a pretty good woodland spot with just a few of the invasives. In a few years, the creeping Charlie is going to take over and it won't be quite as healthy, but it might get out competed by some other things. Okay. So one of the invasives that I expected to see here that I didn't is Dame's rocket. It's also a European flower that was brought over both as food and as just a pretty flower to have.
We do have a question when you have a minute.
Oh, perfect.
I gotta pull up the chat here. It's a little bit harder, I think.
Thank you for your patience.
The chat says,
just in that small area, you have so many invasive plants. Is there any hope to make a difference to get rid of them? What should we do to compete and let the natives win? Oh, that's an excellent question. Thank you. So just because you have some invasive plants doesn't mean that they're necessarily a problem. They can become naturalized. For example, at Fontenelle Forest, we used to spend weeks and months picking garlic mustard to try to get rid of them. When we started our oak woodland restoration, where we opened up the canopy and we got sunlight down to the ground, we discovered that garlic mustard does not like full sunlight. So it became naturalized. So we still find garlic mustard plants, but they no longer take over. So they're no longer invasive. While the plant itself is still considered an invasive, it's become naturalized in that area. So in an area like this, yes, there's a lot of invasive plants, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's terrible. Each invasive has its own treatment method, which complicates things, and they all cost time, money, and other resources. So while I don't normally advocate spraying herbicide on things, that is one of the ways that we use to control invasives. For example, honeysuckle. The best way to control honeysuckle is to cut off the plant at the stems as far down as you can, and then target the herbicide application just to the stem on the living plant layer. So it would go, just paint the herbicide on the stem. At Fontenelle Forest, we use triclopyr. It is an herbicide that does not transfer into the soil very well. So it pretty much stays where it needs to stay. What that does is that kills this plant. Now, this plant has been producing seeds for many, many years, which means there's going to be more than just one plant around here. So on top of dealing with the ones that are currently here, you've got years of the seed bank that you also are going to have to deal with. And in some areas, I'll be honest, it's so invaded that it may not be worth worrying about at the time. There are other things that you can do to make the land healthier without getting rid of every single one. We're actually going to go over and meet another one that is a tree here. So tree of heaven, or Ailanthus, is a very, very tricky invasive. And that's because it has a unique defense mechanism. So this is a mature tree of heaven. I don't know if you're going to be able to get the leaves in it. It's called a Dr Seuss tree by some because as it's leafing out, it looks like something from a Dr Seuss book. It's kind of wiry. It looks like a drawing. So what these trees do is they produce hundreds of thousands of seeds. They're dioecious, so the flowers are male or female per tree, and they smell really bad, which is another way to identify them. Unfortunately, they also look like walnut trees and sumac, depending on where in the growth cycle they are. So sometimes it's not real easy to identify. The biggest problem with these trees is that once they're damaged, they send a signal to the roots that send up stump suckers, like all of these guys here. So as soon as the tree senses it's been damaged, it sends these out. So the most effective treatment, which may take a couple of years of treating, is to actually paint the bark with an herbicide that also has low soil transferability. But the bark of a tree of heaven tree is very, very thin, and it will absorb the herbicide. The tree doesn't know that it's absorbing herbicide, so it doesn't have time to send out the signal to the stump suckers that it's time to reproduce. So it's a more effective way of killing the tree without producing as many of the stump suckers. There's one study that showed that a tree of heaven could sprout stump suckers up to a mile away. So just because you don't see the stump suckers from this individual tree right here, which we actually do, doesn't mean that they haven't sent it somewhere else. One of the biggest challenges to invasive control is even if we eradicated all of the invasives here at Jewel Park, as soon as you step off the boundaries, there's invasives everywhere. Their seeds are being spread, their roots are popping up new ones. So it's a community effort. So this is not something that can just be taken on by a few individuals. It requires education, and it requires a willingness on everybody's part to see that there's a problem and to be interested in taking care of it. Green Bellevue has really been pushing for native plants between Bee City USA and just everybody's interest in creating a more sustainable environment. So we've been pretty good about getting some programming out there on what to do and what to replace it with. You'll see in the coming years that we're going to hit it even harder, and we are going to have some planting programs too. So we'll be in other places and people can come out and learn and get some hands-on experience on how to do it. All right, so you're gonna want to turn around.
Yep.
So, ooh, okay, time out, Bumblebee. Do you see it down there?
Trying to, I don't see it. Oh, yeah, I do.
The big one.
Can't really get a good shot of it.
So notice that the bumblebee is also using the invasive plant. So invasives aren't entirely bad. They can be used by adapted wildlife. The creeping Charlie or henbit's been around for long enough that the wildlife has figured out how to use some of it. That was fun. I get distracted easily. So another plant I want to talk about, because it drives me nuts, are dandelions. Dandelions are non-native. They are also a European introduced plant. However, they are not invasive, despite what all of your neighbors would have you believe. They are unsightly to some, and they spread pretty easily, but they only grow in poor soil where conditions are not good for other things to grow. So dandelions can easily be outcompeted by native plants, so they are not invasive. All right, you're not going up that. I also don't like the noise that we're gonna move quickly. Ooh, watch the whole. Not all undesirable plants for humans are bad. So I want to use this example. Oh, no, that's Virginia creep. Oh, no, here we go. So there's a couple of them here. This guy right here, this green vine, this is called Greenbrier. It's got ridiculously painful thorns that get stuck in your skin, but it is native. Interesting fact about the Greenbrier, once it's about 6 foot tall, it stops producing thorns. And that is because the thorns are an adaptation to prevent being eaten by deer. and a deer's reach is about 6 feet. Then if you look at the back here, so these are, I believe they're tree of heaven that have been treated. And it looks like mostly successfully, they're starting to leaf out a little bit. But on the back here, so there are 2 climbing vines on this tree. One is poison ivy and one is Virginia creeper. They like to grow together. They're both native. One causes issues to humans, the other does not. However, poison ivy doesn't bother other animals. It is actually an excellent food source and a source of nesting material for different mammals and birds in the area. The way you tell them apart is Virginia creeper has 5 leaves and poison ivy has 3. But you can tell them apart by their stems. The Virginia creeper has tendrils and the poison ivy has air roots. So if it looks hairy, that's poison ivy. If it's just got things sticking to the tree, that's Virginia creeper. If you're not sure, don't touch it, because all parts of the poison ivy plant contain the oil that irritate humans up to 7 years after it's dead. So don't touch it any time of year. Don't pull the roots, don't burn it, because the burned oil will get in your lungs. Not fun. All right, see if we can find some Dame's rocket. So Jewel Park has mountain bike trails as well as hiking trails, which is great for recreation, terrible for spreading invasives. When people go by on their bikes, it can either get caught in the bikes or on people's clothes, the seats, and you can transfer it pretty far. One way to prevent transferring invasive species from one place to another is to clean off your clothes, your equipment, your shoes, all of that stuff when you're going from one place to another, when you know there's been invasive plant seeds. Actually, this is a really good example over here of what happens when an invasive takes over. You'll see that there's not a whole lot growing there, but invasive plants. There's garlic mustard and the creeping Charlie. Nettles can grow just about anywhere too. And if they're tall enough, they can outcompete some of those native or invasives. So sometimes you'll find nettles growing where nothing else will in the middle of invasives. But it's also surrounded by honeysuckle bushes.
And some of the Ailanthus that grew there have been treated and they have died off. It looks like a few were broken off, but there was some successful treating of them. And still over there, even so, there's some leaves still starting to come out.
Ailanthus grows really, really fast, which is one of its adaptations. So those trees might be just this year's growth, the ones with the leaves on it. Also, the wood is extremely brittle. So when the plant dies, it breaks off very easily, which is another challenge with treating it, because if you kill the really big trees, they could break off pretty easily and cause some other problems. I'm still not seeing any James rocket, just the phlox. So that's exciting. I don't know if there is phlox at the next park we are going to. So we're going to look at the native plant here. A lot of times there are invasives that look very similar to natives, and that is one way that they're able to compete. So this is phlox, blue phlox or woodland phlox. And this is a native early summer, late spring flower that pops up in the woods. And the main way to tell it apart from the invasive Dame's rocket is phlox, Phlox, has 5 petals. Dame's rocket has 4, Dame. So that's how we teach our volunteers and interns the difference. All right, are there any other questions right now? Because we're about to take a break and head to the next location.
Oh, that's it.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us. We'll pick up again about 2. I keep checking my wrist. I left my watch at home. It's weird. We'll pick up again about 2 o'clock up at College Heights Park, which isn't too far away. Thanks.